as a shareholder, technically you're an owner. Companies were rolling back a lot of their DEI policies. The people who work in the sustainable investing space were concerned that they were going to start rolling back a lot of these environmental commitments that companies had made to reduce their carbon footprint or reduce the amount of plastics. That hasn't really been the case. At the end of the day, companies are looking at their bottom line.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Connecting the Dollars. Today, we are going to take a deeper dive into sustainable investing. Our advisor, Amanda Vaught, was just at a Sustainable Investor Day in New York, and she's got a lot of good insight to share with us. To jump right in, let's talk quickly about sustainable investing versus divesting versus ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance issues that are how you evaluate a company in order to decide if they're a good investment for you or not. So, Amanda, do you want to give a quick outline of what that all is?
Yeah, sure. We have done a longer podcast episode explaining the differences between these, but if you're not familiar, we'll just give some quick background. One approach to these types of issues, I'll say like moral issues in investing, is to divest. And I think people are familiar with that. It's just you don't like a company, you don't buy it. You don't buy their stock. That's a pretty common thing in the financial world, to screen out, say, environmental people concerned about the environment will screen out oil and gas companies, or alcohol, tobacco, and firearms are the traditional sin stocks that people will screen from portfolios, that type of approach. That's a little different than an ESG approach. So this is where you're an investor, you're considering these different factors beyond just financial factors as a way to help you decide if this is a good investment or not. And then sustainable investing, this is more taking a more generally active approach to investing, and in general using your shareholder rights as an owner of the company to advocate for companies to become more sustainable.
So if you are looking, for example, for a fund that is very environmentally friendly, you can utilize research done by various companies, particular funds that have evaluated the stocks that they choose to put into their mutual funds with these particular factors.
And there's a lot of crossover between the different approaches.
Yeah, so some recent background in the realm of sustainable investing and ESG investing. It was really popular over, I don't know, maybe the last decade or so. You would hear a lot about companies going carbon neutral, things of that nature. But that's with the whole DEI backlash within the last year or so. Things become a little bit more politically motivated, and I don't feel like I've heard much about companies trying to do better in those areas. It's a little bit, feels like it fell out of fashion.
Yeah, and I think we see that reflected in the inflows and outflows into different investments who have an ESG lens or sustainable investing lens, or whatever the approach is. We've seen record inflows into those funds into the early 2020s, and then in the past year or two, there's been the flows out. So it has been receding. And then the first ESG became shorthand for a certain political bent. And there was a lot of backlash and lawsuits. Different state governments were, say, banning BlackRock, for example, from investing their pension funds because they thought BlackRock was too ESG-ish. Mm-hmm. From a pure perspective, ESG is not a political lens to view investments, but it got painted that way and turned into a thing that became political. So yeah, so it's definitely been on waning. It's still a large part of the investment world. There's still a lot in the US, people in the US who invest this way, and it's still really big with European funds who want this type of approach in their investments. Just because it's receding doesn't mean it's necessarily going away.
That's good to know. Just like a personal note, like I try to recycle and do all the things, but as one person, one household, it feels like you're not able to really make a dent in, specifically here, I'm talking about like environmental issues. But when you are able to take a look behind the scenes and invest in companies that are actually trying to make their practices more sustainable in many ways, it's nice to see that you can make a difference by contributing to be able to put your money where your mouth is. Do good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you. Just a quick pause. If you are enjoying this content, please give us a like on our YouTube channel, subscribe if you would like to, for more information on these types of deep dives into different types of investments and personal finance. So jumping back in, Amanda, I'm curious about this conference you went to. It sounded like you got a lot of kind of background and insight into how companies are evaluated under this ESG lens.
The second year of this new administration who has been making a lot of changes. And especially when the Trump administration first came in, they were really focused on this anti-DEI push. And we saw a lot of companies responding to that, like Target obviously was a big one in the news, but other ones were targeted. And I think a lot of companies, they like to stay out of the headlines in general. They don't want to have this target on their back. In order to get in front of that, companies were rolling back a lot of their DEI policies. A lot of the people who work in the sustainable investing space were concerned that they were going to start rolling back a lot of these environmental commitments that companies had made to say reduce their carbon footprint or reduce the amount of plastics. That hasn't really been the case. So, which is heartening to hear if you care about the environment. I think the general consensus is yes, some companies have, but not all companies. It is harder to make some progress on some of these issues because of the political environment, but that doesn't necessarily mean there has been widespread backsliding across the board. I think there's a lot of companies who recognize that being good for the environment isn't just about purely being a do-gooder, but when you frame it or look at it from an investor perspective where you say cost of energy is going up, looking at sustainable energy, clean energy approaches are going to help your bottom line because they're going to reduce your energy costs. Framing it that way, it doesn't matter who's in political power at the moment. At the end of the day, companies are looking at their bottom line and saying, yes, this makes sense. They were talking about DEI things being rolled back, and they said maybe a company would try to change the language they'd use, but a lot of companies recognize the value of DEI and the countless studies that show companies perform better when they have diversity. So companies, at the end of the day, that's what they're generally driven by, is making profits. And then if some of these good things can happen, that's great. That's, I think, in general, how these shareholder advocates approach it. They approach it from, let's help the company make more money and improve their bottom line, and try to frame it that way when they're engaged in this dialogue with companies.
So probably most people are familiar with, as you mentioned, the energy efficiency and the DEI policies. But what kind of governance types of examples do you have? I guess this would be more on the subject of treating workers fairly and maybe just on a broader scale, like how they do business, perhaps.
Yeah, I think ESG is environmental, social, government. So there's different factors to look at when looking at a company, and the industry the company is in would impact how important each of those factors might be. So it's really personalized depending on the industry and the company, right? One example they gave was a retail store who had a lot of OSHA violations, and this investor group was concerned about the workers there not being treated properly or getting injured. And how do you think about approaching a company to discuss this issue with them? You have to start with generating alpha, as they say, or what helps the bottom line. As this investor group was researching the issues with these OSHA violations, they discovered there was a lot of violent incidents happening in the store, and the company wasn't necessarily aware of this. And so then they can bring them this issue to them and say, yes, there's OSHA violations, but also because of these issues, we're seeing an increase in violence in your stores. And at the end of the day, that's going to turn customers off and away from your store. And that's the last thing a retail establishment wants. So they can turn it into this more of a conversational thing to say, we're here to help you improve your business. We're not here trying to say you have to change the way you're doing business in order to help your employees. And while yes, it would be nice if a company was motivated, that all it took, but it's not, that's not necessarily how it works, right? So you have to work with what you got to kind of push for these kind of things. In light of that, the company is making changes and improving their practices that are gonna, at the end of the day, help the employees. And then in the long term, it's gonna help the business have a better business. Those kind of stories and those kinds of conversations that are happening behind the scenes and that you don't necessarily see as just like a regular person, right? These aren't publicized things that are going on. These are private conversations that they're having kind of behind the scenes with their shareholders at the end of the day.
Yeah.
These people are mutual fund companies or other nonprofit organizations, but to have a seat at the table, they own shares in these companies and exercise their shareholder rights to be able to have a say, because as a shareholder, technically you're an owner of the company.
Right. It's heartening to see that those conversations are being had and that this is still such a big part of the market, this whole just concept, this whole availability of different investments to have in your portfolio and be a do-gooder.
Yeah, a lot of people, like regular everyday people, like individuals, as opposed to, say, institutions or endowment funds, right? You have a pool of money. Usually it's in your retirement account or other savings. And most people are just motivated. They want to save some money, maybe save for retirement. They buy index funds or whatever, and they don't necessarily think of themselves as an owner of a company, but as a shareholder, you are. And if you buy your shares through all types of different things, different organizations who have different bents, there's environmental, like mutual fund companies, ones that are focused on human rights. There's a lot of religious organizations who have shareholder advocacy arms. The religious groups are like the OGs of sustainable investing. This is not a new thing. This has been around for decades. It's not going anywhere, and I don't think anytime soon, even if its popularity is declining somewhat.
Definitely been less in the news lately. But yeah, vote with your dollars if that is something you care about. And you can definitely talk to us more about how you can align your portfolio with your values and your goals. Amanda does an extensive amount of research on this. She's very involved in this world of investing. So yeah, anything else you would like to add? Any other takeaways from the conference or just general thoughts?
It's heartening to see people working on this in the current political moment with the cuts in funding to a lot of programs from the government. The private capital is a huge pool of money. It's larger than the government. And so the types of investments you buy can have an impact if that is something that you're interested in. It doesn't have to just be institutions and endowments, although those are large pools of money. Individuals can participate in this process too. I don't think a lot of people even realize some of the things that go on.
Oh yeah, this goes very deep. We're just scratching the surface here. But yeah, I find it very interesting. Thanks for keeping me updated because I certainly am learning a lot from you, and hopefully everyone else listening is as well. So if you would like to learn more about ESG, as Amanda said, we have a whole podcast going on types of ESG versus sustainable versus divesting, going a little bit more into that. Like and subscribe on YouTube, find us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. It's at Propel Financial Advisors, and our website is propelfinancialadvisors.com. You can go there and schedule a consultation with us, and we can tell you more about how to align your goals with your portfolio. All right, Amanda, anything else? Or otherwise, we will see you next time.
Okay, see you next time.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.